My favorite garment to sew is dresses because they're very easy, they're very versatile, you can wear them anywhere that you want, and there are just so many different variations. Hi, I'm Amy Allen, a sewing instructor and blogger from Portland, Oregon. I teach classes both in person and online, and I'd like to discuss two-thread serger stitches with you to make sure that you're using them. So many people who have sergers, they'll use the 4-thread overlock, they'll use a lot of the 3-thread stitches, but they never think about those 2-thread stitches. And I want to make sure that you're utilizing all of the parts of your serger. So what you're going to need is obviously your serger, 2 spools of serger thread, and I would recommend that you have 2 different colors so that you can easily adjust your tensions. You'll also need thread snips, a pair of tweezers if those would be helpful for you to thread that lower looper, and then this little piece right here, this is your converter. It can also be called a spreader, and this sits on top of your upper looper, and the small metal hook at the end of the converter fills the eye of the upper looper so that you don't have to have thread in the upper looper. So you'll also need some fabric strips. I like to make mine 2 inches wide by 18 inches long because it's much easier to make serged samples then, and you can also cut them apart if you want to and save them along with a piece of paper that has all of your stitch tension information so that you have that later if you need it. So let's look at this machine. Open up the looper cover. I have my tensions already set up for a 2-thread overlock, which is what we'll start with. And I'm using my left needle, so I don't need my right needle. I also have my lower looper already threaded, but I need that converter piece put on here. So this is really nice. This very easily slides on here. On some machines it's a little bit trickier, but on this one it's very easy to just slide this on here and to make sure that that little metal arm comes over and fills in the eye of the upper looper. So here I'm using actually a wider stitch tension to make sure that you can see my stitch easily. And I'm using just a standard stitch length, and my differential feed is set at neutral because I don't need to use that since I'm serging on a cotton that won't stretch out or anything like that. So now that my converter's on there, I can go ahead and make a thread chain because you always do that once you thread your serger. And since it made a nice thread chain, I know that my converter's on correctly, so I'm ready to go. So with my tensions for this 2-thread overlock, my needle thread is very, very loose, and my lower looper thread is a little bit tighter. You'll want to check your machine manual to get some of these suggested tension settings. I say suggested because you'll probably have to change them to make them just perfect. They all just take a little bit of tweaking, so just take your time and try to make your sample look like mine. So I don't have to raise the presser foot on a serger because the feed dogs go ahead and come forward and pull it through the machine. So my presser foot is lowered and I can just go ahead and serge. So here, I can check this back here. Now my lower looper is actually put on top of the stitch because of that converter, and on the back side I have my needle thread. So let me pull this out of here and we can look at it just a little bit more. So I can just run that right out here, use my nice snips. So here, like I said, that lower looper's on top, and because my needle thread, it pierces the fabric down here, but it actually stretches over to the edge to meet up with that lower looper. Therefore, this stitch doesn't lock where the needle comes in. It actually locks on the edge of the fabric, which makes it not a good choice for seaming because the stitch will just pull right open. So this is actually really wonderful for finishing the edges on garments. A lot of people will use like the 3-thread overlock or the 4-thread overlock, and those are just a little bit thicker because they have that extra thread in them. So if you use this 2-thread stitch, that's just perfect, and this is also really beautiful decoratively. So now let's make a 2-thread flatlock. So you might notice I'm not actually going to change anything about my tension settings. I'm using the exact same settings for the flatlock that I'm about to make as I just did for the overlock. So I can go ahead and feed this out because I know the tensions look just fine because we just checked them. So with this overlock, I have, again, the exact same thing. And we talked about that stitch locking on the edge instead of by the needle line. So here's what I mean by that seam opening up. If I pull this, I now have a 2-thread flatlock. So a lot of people don't realize you just use the exact same tensions. And so here on this flatlock, I have on the top, I have loops. And these loops are really beautiful when you use a decorative thread. You can use this, down sportswear. It's really great to use it on those seams. It's perfect on lingerie or anywhere else that you need a nice flat seam so that you won't have extra seam allowance rubbing against your skin. And then on the other side, we have ladders. Now this, you'll see that my fabrics aren't laying perfectly flat. One of them is slightly folded under. That happens when you create a flatlock and you actually cut your fabric as you serge it. If you don't want your fabric to roll under, then you can align your fabric edge or your fabric fold in between your needle and your blade on your serger, so that when you open this up, it'll just be perfectly flat. And I have a sample of that. So here, I have the front side of the stitch with the ladders. Here I have the back side, or this is the loops, this is the ladders. And you can use these down your garments. They can be really, really lovely. And something else you can do with the ladder side is you can feed ribbon under there or any kind of cording to really add a beautiful decorative element to whatever you're making. So now let's do a 2-thread wrap stitch. Now, wrap stitch is something that may not be listed as an optional stitch in your manual, but all that it really takes is just a little tension adjustment. So I am going to tighten up my needle thread. And if you don't have the tension settings, you'll have to play around if they're not listed in your manual. Mine's about a 6.25, and then on my lower looper, I'll do a 2.25. So that lower looper is nice and loose because a lower looper, we want it to wrap all the way around the edge. And we want that needle thread to stay nice and tight. So I haven't changed anything else, just my tensions. So I'll run this through and then we'll check it. As you can see, that lower looper is wrapped all the way around the edge and my needle thread is nice and tight along the needle line. So this stitch you could seam with, but it's not going to be very strong. Let's go ahead and move this out of the machine here. So again, this just wraps all the way around the stitch. So something that you might notice about this stitch is that it's reversible. So if you like to finish the edges of a jacket with serging, or let's say you want to finish the edge of a blanket, this can be really, really beautiful. I love to use this stitch when I'm sewing something delicate. I just made a rayon tank top, and on the inside I wanted a very soft stitch. So I used a 2-thread wrap stitch after I sewed it with a straight stitch on my sewing machine to finish my edges, and I used a textured nylon or a woolly nylon to completely encase the edge so it's very soft and very beautiful. So that is a really wonderful finish on the inside of your garments.